Now we move on to what would be, as I would consider, the first Scandinavian conquest of the British Isles. And with Rome crumbling, with it just being sacked, Roman legions were pulled from Britain. And as a result of that, the unconquered Picts from the north decided that would be a pretty good time to start looting and stealing some stuff. And unfortunately, the Britons, who had been much used to having Roman legionaries fight their battles for them, were unprepared and understaffed military-wise to be able to fend off the various Picts and Scots who would raid across the borders and attack England. In desperation, as various Celtic and Briton leaders retreated to their hill forts, they sought help from various mercenary companies, most prominent of which being the Saxons, Jutes, and the Angles, all of which were from either northern Germany or from Denmark. And I'll go a little bit further into what these people were and where they came from in a minute. Now, they were promised land and food, all so they can just drive away the various raiders. Now, as this does seem to satisfy the history rule, which is you must always pay your mercenaries, unfortunately, as more and more Saxons, Jutes and Angles came across and settled in these lands that they'd been given, they began to realise maybe Britain would be better if we just ran the place ourselves. And eventually, during the middle of the 4th century, around 455, they decided to rebel and take over the country themselves from the Britons. With the mercenaries in full revolt, they slowly began carving up England into various different fiefdoms, as various warlords fought to regain control and get their own stake of land. It was at this point that the Picts and the Scots decided that they weren't really going to have to deal with this and decided to leave and leg it over the border, returning only on occasion to do the occasional border raid. So now we get to the actual people. Well, first we get to the Jutes. The Jutes are from the northern peninsula of Jutland, northern Denmark, while the Angles are from southern Jutland, southern Denmark. The Saxons are from a place called Saxony, which is located roughly around the area below Denmark, around northern Germany. Both these groups decided that they would begin settling into these areas. However, it is unclear of whether or not how and why this various migration began. Now, there have been thoughts that most of these people were indeed just finding a new place to settle. Britain had now become prime real estate for the first time in a long time, because, unlike most areas, it wasn't being attacked by various nomadic groups like the Alans, the Alvars, or the Huns, and it also had the added bonus of not having a Roman garrison around, and having a nice cold sea between them and everyone else. So once again, Britain was prime real estate. Also, it may have been that due to various temperature and atmospheric changes at the time, is that farming was indeed difficult in their northern lands. So they decided to move to fresher pastures near. Much fun and fighting happened over the various centuries, and over time, and over the centuries, these various different kingdoms were created by these three different groups. Wessex, Sussex, Middlesex were both created by the Saxons. Kent was founded by the Jutes, and East Anglia by the Angles. Northumbria in the north would later become an Anglo-Saxon kingdom around the 5th century. Then finally, with the kingdom finally at peace, Christian missionaries could finally cross the channel and begin Christianizing the now newly established Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And thus the old Norse gods finally saw their end in England, at least for a time. So then finally, in the 7th and 8th century, shipping technology finally took its most bloody step forward. Finally, Northmen were able to craft various different ships, who would later be known as the longships. These were ships that could be manoeuvred using not only oars but also sails, and had a shallower draft, which meant they could get up the various different rivers of various countries. This made them prime ships for traders as well as raiders. And thus, because people think that this particular advancement in technology, this may have been one of the impetuses for starting the Viking Age, as now they finally had a way to which they could hit and run and raid wherever they wished. So that was around the time that the Viking Age finally began, and by the time of 793 AD, the first attack was recorded. Lindisfarne, and thus began a series of raids that would later be known as the Viking Age. And by the end of the century, at the end of the 8th and 9th century, various Norse groups had hit both Ireland, Scotland, France, even Spain. And thus, the start of the Viking Age began. So thank you all for joining me. I hope to see you again. Please like and subscribe. You all know the drill. Surely a lot of you already know YouTube by now. So I hope to see you again.